All right. Good morning, everybody. We are going to get started with Cattle Chats, and we have Jeff Goodwin to start you guys off this morning.
Morning. What a fine morning it is. We're going to talk about a topic this morning that's pretty exciting to me. I've spent most of my career working on it, and we're going to talk about dirt. I know everybody's excited to talk about dirt, right? All right, so before we get started, don't have a lot of time this morning, but I want to mention the folks that helped us get here, the National Grazing Land Coalition. If you don't know about the National Grazing Land Coalition, NatGLC is a producer-led and driven organization made up of it's a 13-member organization, of which NCBA was one of the founding members. Okay, and so NatGLC's sole focus is to provide producers information. So it's led by landowners, and they provide information content to landowners through a number of different varieties, through great social media, through the conference, which is in Tucson in let's see, this coming December, right? Rob Cook's the chairman of NatGLC, so if you want to learn more about NatGLC, come speak to Rob, or this young lady right over here is the executive director. And so with that, we're going to move forward, and if this thing will work. There we go. All right. What is soil health? Lots of people have heard people talk about soil health, right? It's been a kind of a buzzword for a little while. So it's very simple. It's literally the continued capacity of a soil to function as a vital living system. For so many years, we've talked about soil as really just a medium to grow crops, right? How much fertilizer do we need to put on it? How much, what inputs do we need to put at? We need to change the glasses, change the lens in which how we view soil, right? Look at it as the vital living system that it is, right? And so how do we do that? How do we move forward and think about soils in a different capacity? Because when most of us go home and we look at our farm and ranch, this is what we see. We see grass, we see soil, we don't see the soil, right? So we see a situation where maybe we have more grass, maybe we have less grass, maybe we have a diverse landscape. You can't see the soil, right? So oftentimes you got to dig a hole to figure out what it looks like, okay? So it's not at the top of everyone's mind. What everyone sees is the forages. And so that's an absolute reflection, though, of what's happening underground. Once you begin to understand what's happening below ground, it's it invites you to understand how those metrics begin to influence other things. And so when we start thinking about managing landscapes and managing for healthy soils, a lot of times you're going to hear people talk about practices. Well, you need to plant cover crops. You need to move your cows every day and increase your stock density. You need to do this practice, right? I would say that's the last thing you need to do. The first thing you need to do is understand that those practices help us influence these ecosystem processes. And so when we need to add a fertility amendment, when we need to use a herbicide, when we need to increase stock density, we're usually treating a symptom of one of these broken processes, right? So we've got a water cycle, the energy flow, how efficient are we at capturing the sunlight produced from the sun and producing this forage out here? Do we have a functional nutrient cycle and community dynamics? Do we have the right plants on the right soils at the right time? Okay, so usually when we're trying to implement a practice, one of these are maybe not as functional as we would want. So we're trying to fix one thing, right? So we've all heard about the soil health principles. I'm not going to go in depth on these today because I want to talk about some real world implementation of how a producer can understand their context, work to minimize soil disturbance, increase diversity, maintain roots. We've all heard the soil health principles. We've been preaching them for a long time. Just know that when we talk about soil health management, we're focusing on fixing ecosystem processes, and we base our management based on these soil health principles, okay? So let's talk about how all this works in practice. Does it work? That's a big question a lot of people are asking. So I want to introduce you to Meredith Ellis. Consequently, Meredith is the Region 4 Environmental Stewardship Award winner. She got her award last night. Meredith and her family ranch in Ralston, Texas, with her dad, GC. GC has owned this ranch since 1983, okay? Since 1983, they managed it very conventionally, okay? Just like every extension agent ever told them to do it, right? They managed it conventionally. They had moderate stocking rates. They were doing everything right. They were doing everything everyone told them to do, right? So they had a reliance on hay. So they would stock their ranch, and if they ran out of forage, guess what? They picked up hay from someone else, okay? So they picked up those winter months with hay. They used a lot of synthetic fertility, okay? They fertilized their pastures to increase productivity. We told people to do that for 40 years. He didn't do anything wrong. He did exactly what everybody told you, but he ended up with lots of input costs, okay? So Meredith came back to the ranch in 2013, and for 5 years she worked with her dad. And during that time, we had droughts, we had floods, we had depressed markets, and she knew that there was a different way that we needed to view how we're implementing the practices on the ranch. So in 2017, they decided to look at their operation a little bit differently. And so they looked at their soils through that new lens. They began to focus on healthy soil as the foundational driver in their decision making. And so they began using cover crops. Are you managing for soil health if you plant cover crops? Maybe. It depends on how, right? And so the cover crops allowed them to facilitate the principles. So they started moving in the right direction, right? They started facilitating those soil health principles. They doubled the days of grazing on their cropland, and they were able to introduce Bermuda grass. Now, how many of y'all think that's a good-looking cover crop planting? It's pretty terrible, right? It's the process. It takes a little while to get things going. You've got a soil that's highly dependent on inputs, and you're you're removing that fertility. It takes a little while for it to get back into shape. And so they worked through the process, they kept their eyes on the prize. The cover crops also allowed them to increase their flexibility. Flexibility and adaptation is the number one reason most of these producers are successful. It allowed them to increase the rest in their native grazing lands because they're increasing the cover crops on the cropland, okay? They increase cost recovery as well. And so this is really just an opportunity for them to increase the flexibility and the adaptation that it provided them. It allowed them to decrease their dependence on synthetic inputs. And so they reduced their input costs by 80% by moving towards this focused effort. They increased their grazable acres because they grazed them rather than haying them, okay? So it's just a different shift on using the land uses that you have in front of you. On the cow side, they combined their herds. They had a bunch of different herds and a bunch of different pastures. They put all the cows in one herd, so they were able to increase their stock density. And when they increased their stock density, they were able to get that animal impact. And what happens when you put all the cows in one herd? What's happening in the rest of the pastures? There's no cows in them, right? So they're resting. Those plants are fully able to recover. So it increased not only the distribution of grazing across the ranch, it increased those longer rest periods. And everybody will tell you, if you do this, it's going to take more time. I've got to move fences. If it works for your context, it works. In this case, they spent half the time checking the cattle than they did. So they decreased their labor costs, okay? One of the biggest takeaways, the benefits for them is they were able to avoid culling cattle during 3 years of severe drought. I don't know if you guys have been to Texas or the Southwest over the last 3 years, but we've been in a very, very dry period. because of their balanced stocking rates, they did not have to cull one cow other than normal culling procedures. They didn't have to cull it because it was too dry. They also started to manage for diversity. And diversity creates opportunities in every facet of life, right? But they started to increase the value and appreciate the value that bee balm and all these other legumes and forbs that you see, because guess what? In the spring, those forbs, they're 20, 25+% crude protein. And a lot of people look at it and say, well, we need to spray our pastures. Why? Those cows will eat all of those. It's a forage. So over the process, they increased their profitability, their net profitability by 40%, okay? So just telling you that story is from an anecdotal perspective. Okay, so these are the three primary takeaways that Meredith told me to tell y'all. I called her and I said, what's your three things you want people to know? Number one, they plan with pencil. They don't write it down. It's not permanent. They plan with pencil because adaptability and flexibility are their two main priorities. They prioritize principles over practices. They don't do a practice just because they think they need to do it. They focus on maintaining those principles first, and then there's a bottom-up approach. So they focus their decisions on impact that's going to impact profit per acre, not necessarily profit per head. Okay? Now, they've gone down this road. Now they're on the cover of magazines. They're winning awards. They've made ranching fun again, and they love it. So that's a cool story I wanted to tell you. Okay? Does it always work like that? Now I'm going to tell you a different story. I'm going to tell you a story with some data about a research project where we took a ranch that was feeding hay all winter. Every gate on the ranch looked just like that one. It was wide open. We had really high input costs, and so we wanted to test, could we make this work? Everybody always tells you the success stories. I'm going to tell you one that didn't work. I'm going to talk to you about one that didn't work, and I'm going to tell you why. And I don't know why this thing is moving. I'm not even touching it. Hello. Can y'all advance the slides? There we go. Maybe I need to stand right here. All right. So what did we do? Let me go back to this one, right? Go back one. All right. So this is the ranch here. We split it in half. And on the north half, we managed it from a very conservation-focused effort. On the south half, we didn't change a thing. We kept cows all in the same pastures. On the north side, we balanced the stocking rate. We increased grazing distribution. We increased the recovery periods. We integrated diversity through cover crops, reduced inorganic inputs, and we reduced or eliminated the supplemental feeding in the winter. On the south ranch, we didn't change anything. Traditional season-long stocking, no rest or deferment, increased fertility, continued our winter feeding program. We just wanted to completely split them and do something different. So what did we measure? We measured forage inventories twice a year. We looked at the livestock responses from body condition score, fecal NRR data, percent crude protein, percent organic matter, a number of soil health metrics, and we looked at every dollar we spent. Okay? Here's what we found from an ecological perspective. We saw increased forage productivity on all treatments. Okay? Just because we did all those other management practice doesn't mean that we outworked the rain. The rain, we got increased rain over the 5 years that we measured all of these things, okay? But we did see increased productivity. The difference is on the north half, we left a lot of standing grass. So at the end of the grazing season, we left 63% of our forage. And on the continuous season, they were over leveraged. They grazed over 30, they only had about 30% left. That's not enough to be comfortable. I'll argue, and you'll see why in a minute, we left too much grass on the north side, okay? From a soil health perspective, all of the treatments increased except for the cultivated grazed paddocks that were conventionally tilled. Those did not increase. Another metric that was interesting to us, and I'm not sure why, but there was no significant trend in water extractable organic carbon, okay? You'll hear a lot about organic carbon, and had I known when we started this study in 2011 that carbon was going to be the name of the game, I would have been measuring meter deep cores and measuring soil organic carbon with dry combustion. We didn't know that then. But we did know that water extractable organic carbon is what's driving the biology in the soil. So we measured that one. And so we didn't see a whole lot of differences between the treatments. What about the economics? I know you can't read that, but I'm going to hit you the high points. The conservation system. Labor costs were reduced by half, 48%. Feed costs were reduced by 41%. Equipment fuel costs reduced by 44%. Seed costs were increased by 160%. Why? We're double cover cropping on the cropland. We're grazing a warm season cover and we're grazing a cool season cover. All in all, we reduced the variable costs by 22%. Okay? That sounds good, right? The problem was, come on. I don't know what to do. I need to go push the button. There you go, Rob. The problem was that revenue was also reduced by 21%. Why? Because, thank you. Why? Because we didn't compensate for our stocking rate. We were too focused on not feeding hay in the winter, and we didn't increase our stocking when we found some wins. When we increased forage productivity, we were too focused on holding that forage. That's the right answer most of the time, but you got to take your wins when you can. So the unit cost of production on the conventional side was right at about $997 per head, which is too high. The conservation one was over $1,000 in terms of unit cost of production. But which one of those two systems is more leveraged? Okay, so I've got extra grass on the other one. So if I add stocking, if I increase stocking rate, I can reduce that unit cost of production on the conservation side because I've got room to do it. On the other one, I don't. I'm at $1,000 a head production costs, and I don't have any room to do anything. So that's a risky proposition, right? Maybe I'm pushing the wrong button. All right. So for overall, when we looked at the economics, the profitability, there was no difference, right? So we reduced the cost, but we didn't increase enough revenue to make up for it. So there was no financial gain in either system, but there's opportunities. And so what's the two largest lessons that we learned here? Number one, on the establishment of the no-till covers, we completely removed fertility. I don't know where I am on time. We completely removed the fertility, okay? My recommendation is don't completely remove it, okay? These are tools. Use the tool in the most appropriate way. So ease yourself into it, right? Wean yourself off of it if you want to reduce that cost, but make incremental shifts. We went cold turkey and it didn't work. The next one is focusing too heavy on not adjusting stocking rate when forage was in surplus. Take your wins when you get them. And so utilize the forage that you have. Just be more responsive to those increases in forage productivity, because what ended up happening is we didn't increase stocking rate, so we didn't have the calf sales to increase revenue. That's why that system was not profitable. This paper's published if you're interested in reading it. All right, so what's the take-home message? Again, the take-home message is I think the management of the principles ultimately worked. I think we made some bad decisions from a management perspective on not capitalizing on those opportunities when they were there. So that's the lesson I kind of want to teach you here is the principles worked, but you got to take your wins when you get them. And don't be so conservative that you want to take all the tools off the table. Focus on what's going to help you. Lastly, I want to mention a couple other things. The National Grazing Land Coalition has got a lot of opportunities going on across the country. They've got a Florida coordinator position opened. If you're interested in this kind of stuff and you want to work with National Grazing Land Coalition, they got some opportunities. They got a number of climate smart projects around the country. If you're interested in any of those, go speak to that young lady in the green shirt. And with that, use this QR code if you want to learn more about NatGLC. And we're at booth 984. So please come see us. Thank you so much.
All right, we have 5 minutes of questions if anybody has any questions.
What's that? Yep. There you go. Yes, sir. Brian?
Yeah, so you mentioned going cold turkey challenges. Do you think year 2, 3, 4, 5, even going cold turkey, do you think the system kind of caught up if you increase stocking density?
I think we shocked it. I mean, that soil was addicted to synthetic fertility. And I think over time, we could have gotten there. We just turned off the faucet. In hindsight, we should have probably weaned ourselves off of it. Synthetic fertility helps increase production, okay? And so I'm not opposed to any tool. When we talk about regenerative agriculture, I'm not opposed to the tools. It's how we use the tools. And so if we use it sparingly, we use it in a focused perspective, I think it would have paid us here. I do think we could have weaned off of it over time, but going cold turkey didn't work for us.
Would a switch to straight biological fertilizers have helped in that? Or
What was the question?
would a switch to straight biological fertilizers have helped, or do you think you would have still needed some synthetics to make that get through?
No, I think we could have used some other amendment. We could have used some kind of organic fertility, whether it be chicken, poultry litter. It was an additional cost, though. So we were also looking at cost, but we were too focused on being conservative, and it bit us. So I do think could have been an opportunity to do that. It was more of a cost question than a production question.
Jeff, Matthew Warnkin, AgriProve. With your economic analysis, how do you think you should best represent the sort of balance sheet aspects? Because I think you were talking that the conservation managed lands had like twice the standing forages available, but that didn't seem to be caught up in the sort of more cash flow, profit and loss analysis. Do you have any thoughts on how you might capture that sort of more balance sheet or capital aspect?
So there's a couple of different ways, and we did bring in heifers, and we grazed them for about a month to try to increase that towards the end of the study. So we would bring in heifers, we paid ourselves a day fee, right? So we paid ourselves per head per day. It wasn't enough though. We needed to increase the stocking rate, and so that we had those calves as part of our revenue stream too. And we underestimated that. And so I guess the takeaway there is to take your wins when you can get them, and just be more proactive at utilizing the forage resource as best you can.
Great presentation. Jay Jensen, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. The story here certainly so great to see. It's not always a positive story, but still, on balance, it seems like you win on productivity, you win on conservation. Why aren't more ranchers adopting these practices? And maybe a follow-on to that is, what are the bottlenecks for adoption of these practices?
It's a great question. We're talking about the barriers to adoption. I think there's a number of them. I think there's financial risk. Many of these ranchers have been applying the management they've been applying for years, and so there's financial risk with moving away from some of the traditional, more conventional practices. Some of it could be an equipment issue. They don't have access to a no-till drill or some of the equipment that are available, and you don't want to go buy one. Those things are expensive. So I think tradition can be an issue. I think there's financial risk associated with it, and there's risk associated with planting a cover crop. I mean, we still are beholden to is it going to rain or not, right? So you put $120 per acre into the ground, it doesn't rain, there's risk associated with that. And so I think that I think there's a number of reasons, some financial, some social.
All right, that ends our time for questions. I just want to thank Jeff Goodwin as well as the National Grazing Lands Coalition for putting this on for us. If you guys have any more questions, I'm sure you guys can hunt them down throughout the
everybody.
rest of it. So thank you guys again.